Have you ever heard of a message so cryptic it could unlock a murder? Today, we're diving into a case that feels like it's straight out of a Hollywood movie, but I assure you, it's chillingly real. It involves a missing prison guard, a high-security prison, and a prisoner who wasn't supposed to speak, but held the key to everything. Our story begins on a cold January morning in 2008 at the Donaldson Correctional Facility in Alabama. This isn't just any prison, it's a maximum security institution, home to some of the state's most dangerous offenders. Life here is rigid, routine, and predictable, or at least, it was. On this particular day, the morning roll call was missing a name: Corrections Officer John Michael Giddens. Mike, as his friends called him, was 31 years old, a former Marine, and known for his discipline and punctuality. He was the kind of guy who never missed a shift, never showed up late. So when his car was found in the employee parking lot, but Mike was nowhere to be seen, alarm bells started ringing immediately. The search began. Every corner of the vast prison was scoured. Every cell, every corridor, every storage room. The surrounding woods were combed by search parties, but there was no sign of Mike Giddens. It was as if he had vanished into thin air from one of the most secure places on earth. Investigators were stumped. They interviewed Mike's colleagues, his family, and his friends. They learned he was a dedicated officer, a loving father, and had no known enemies outside the prison walls. The focus naturally shifted inside. Could an inmate have been involved? It seemed impossible. How could an inmate make a guard disappear without a trace, with no witnesses and no evidence left behind? The prison was locked down. Every inmate was questioned. As you can imagine, in a place built on silence and codes of conduct, getting a straight answer was nearly impossible. The days turned into weeks, and the hope of finding Mike alive began to dwindle. The investigation was hitting a dead end. The official theory was that he had simply walked away, abandoning his job and his family. But for those who knew him, that explanation never made sense. For nearly a year, the case went cold. The official file on John Michael Giddens was gathering dust. It seemed the world had forgotten about the missing guard, but one person hadn't. Enter a dedicated investigator who couldn't let the case go. He believed the answer was still inside Donaldson's walls. He decided to take another look, to re-interview inmates, hoping for a fresh perspective. This is where our story takes a turn you won't see coming. During his interviews, the investigator came across an inmate named Mario Woodward. Woodward was serving a life sentence for murder. He was a career criminal, a man who knew the system inside and out. When questioned about Giddens' disappearance, Woodward was evasive, offering nothing but denials. But the investigator noticed something odd. As he was leaving the interview room, Woodward scribbled something on a piece of paper and slid it across the table. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a name. It was a strange, cryptic message. The note read, "Check the new car that got painted." A new car that got painted. What could that possibly mean? It was a bizarre clue. At first, it seemed like a dead end, another game played by a bored inmate. Investigators checked prison records. Had any prison vehicles been recently repainted? No. Had any staff members recently had their cars painted? They checked, but nothing panned out. The clue was a puzzle with no clear solution. The investigator was frustrated but persistent. He kept thinking about Woodward's words. Why would a man serving a life sentence risk giving a clue, however strange? What did he have to gain? He decided to dig into Woodward's own case file, looking for anything that might connect him to this mysterious message. And that's when he found it. Before being convicted for murder, Mario Woodward had faced other charges, including a carjacking. During that crime, the stolen car had been taken to a body shop and repainted a different color to disguise it. The investigator's heart started pounding. The phrase "the new car that got painted" wasn't literal. It was a metaphor. It was Woodward's way of describing a cover-up, a change of identity. He wasn't talking about a vehicle at all, but what was he talking about? The investigator went back to the original timeline of Giddens' disappearance. He looked at every event that happened in the prison around that time. Maintenance logs, construction reports, anything and everything. And then, he saw it. A single-line item in a work order from January 2008, around the time Mike Giddens went missing. A section of concrete flooring in the prison's segregation unit had been repaired. A fresh layer of concrete had been poured. A new floor that got painted, so to speak. Could this be it? It was a long shot, a wild guess based on a prisoner's riddle. But it was the only lead they had. With permission from the warden, a team was assembled. They went to the segregation unit, a place known as the Hole, where the most disruptive inmates are held. They brought ground-penetrating radar, a technology that can see through solid concrete. They scanned the section of the floor that had been repaired. And the radar lit up. It showed an anomaly, an object buried beneath the concrete. An object that was roughly the size and shape of a human body. The silence in that unit was deafening as the jackhammers started. Piece by piece, they broke away the concrete that had been poured nearly a year earlier. And there, buried in a shallow grave that had been hiding in plain sight, they found the body of Officer John Michael Giddon. The mystery of his disappearance was solved, but a new one had just begun. Who did this and why? The investigation now had a crime scene, and it was laser-focused on one man, Mario Woodward. The man who gave them the clue. Investigators pieced together the horrifying events of that day. They learned that another inmate, seeking revenge on Giddon for a disciplinary write-up, had orchestrated the attack. This inmate had recruited Mario Woodward and another accomplice. They ambushed Officer Giddon in a secluded area, overpowered him, and ended his life. Their plan was cold and calculated. They knew about the scheduled concrete repair. They hid Giddon's body in a utility closet, and under the cover of night, moved him to the segregation unit. They dug a shallow grave in the area that was about to be filled, placed him inside, and then the next day, the maintenance crew, completely unaware, poured fresh concrete right over him, sealing the secret tomb. But why would Mario Woodward, one of the perpetrators, give the clue that would lead to the discovery? This is perhaps the most fascinating part of the story. Woodward was already serving life without parole. An additional murder conviction wouldn't change his ultimate fate. According to investigators, his motive was complex. It was part conscience, part ego. He wanted the family to have closure, but he also wanted to show how clever he was, that he held the power to solve the crime he helped commit. He couldn't confess outright because of the inmate code, so he created a riddle only a sharp investigator could solve. He was the prisoner who wasn't supposed to speak, but he found a way to make his voice heard. In the end, Mario Woodward and his accomplice were convicted of Officer Giddon's murder. Justice was served, but it came at a terrible cost. The case exposed the brutal realities of life and death inside a maximum security prison and served as a stark reminder of the dangers corrections officers face every day. It's a story about a dedicated officer, a cold-blooded crime, and a cryptic message from the most unlikely of sources. A puzzle solved not with DNA or fingerprints, but with a riddle from a killer. It shows that sometimes the truth isn't just buried, it's encoded, waiting for someone to break the code. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as compelling as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true crime cases. See you next time. The voices behind the walls. The storm outside Florida State Prison had grown stronger by the time Detective Marcus Alvarez finished reading the file. Rain struck the prison windows like small stones, and thunder rolled across the dark sky above the razor wire fences. Inside the warden's office, the air felt heavy. Warden Charles Hammond leaned forward in his chair. "You see why we were concerned about Bryce," he said quietly. Alvarez placed the file back on the desk. "Concerned," he replied. "Your former guard disappears, leaves a warning saying they are ready, and you call that concern?" Hammond's expression hardened. "We run one of the toughest prisons in the state, Detective. Rumors and paranoia are part of daily life here." Alvarez shook his head. "Maybe, but now a man connected to 3 of your most dangerous inmates is missing." Hammond stood up. "You want answers, then you'll need to talk to them." Minutes later, Alvarez walked down a long concrete corridor inside the prison's special housing unit. The air smelled of metal and disinfectant. Each cell door was solid steel with a narrow window. These were the inmates who required the highest level of control. The first cell belonged to Daniel Crow Mercer. A guard opened the small viewing hatch. Inside, Mercer sat calmly at a small metal desk, reading a worn paperback book. He looked up slowly when Alvarez stepped closer. For a moment, neither man spoke. Mercer smiled faintly. "You're not a guard," he said. "No," Alvarez replied. "Detective Marcus Alvarez." Mercer closed the book and placed it carefully on the desk. "What brings a detective to visit me?" Alvarez crossed his arms. "A former guard named Leonard Bryce is missing. Mercer's expression didn't change. Is he? Alvarez watched him closely. You spent months talking to him. Mercer leaned back in his chair. Guards talk to inmates all the time, not the way Bryce talked to you. Mercer's eyes glinted slightly. And how exactly was that? Alvarez stepped closer to the cell door. You told him something before he left this job. Mercer didn't answer. Instead, he stood up slowly and walked toward the steel door. When he spoke again, his voice was calm. What did he tell you? Alvarez held up the file. He said you told him something was coming. Mercer tilted his head slightly. And do you believe him? Alvarez didn't hesitate. Yes, for the first time. Mercer's smile widened. That's good, he said quietly. Most people don't listen. Alvarez felt a chill run down his spine. Listen to what? Mercer leaned closer to the small window in the door. The truth. Alvarez kept his voice steady. Which is, Mercer's answer came almost like a whisper. That the prison system doesn't understand the people it locks away. Alvarez frowned. Explain that. Mercer shrugged. You build walls. You add cameras. You put men in cages. He gestured around the cell. You think that stops everything. Alvarez stared at him. You're saying it doesn't. Mercer's smile faded. No. Alvarez leaned forward. Then what were you planning with Bryce? Mercer looked at him for a long moment. Then he said something that made Alvarez's heart skip. We weren't planning anything. Alvarez narrowed his eyes. Then why was he talking to you? Mercer's voice dropped. Because he was the only one who listened. Alvarez opened the file again. Bryce said you told him someone would open the door. Mercer nodded slightly. That's true. Alvarez felt tension build in his chest. Who? Mercer stepped back from the door. That's the part Bryce didn't understand. Alvarez waited. Mercer spoke slowly. We never needed someone inside the prison. Alvarez's voice hardened. Then who? Mercer looked directly at him. Someone outside. The words echoed inside Alvarez's mind. Before he could ask another question, Mercer sat back down and picked up his book. Talk to Salazar, he said calmly. He loves explaining things. The next cell belonged to Victor Salazar. Unlike Mercer, Salazar was already standing when Alvarez arrived. He looked older, his hair streaked with gray, but his eyes were sharp. You must be the detective, Salazar said. Alvarez didn't waste time. Leonard Bryce is missing. Salazar nodded slowly. I expected that. Alvarez felt the tension rising again. You expected it. Salazar smiled slightly. People disappear when they learn too much. Alvarez leaned closer to the door. What did he learn? Salazar tapped the metal wall beside him. That prisons aren't as secure as people think. Alvarez's patience was fading. 3 inmates spoke with Bryce for months. Now he's gone. Salazar folded his arms. You want to know what we told him? Yes. Salazar looked almost amused. We told him the truth. Alvarez clenched his jaw. And what truth is that? Salazar's eyes darkened. That Florida built prisons to keep criminals inside. He paused. But it forgot something. Alvarez waited. Salazar continued quietly. It forgot about the world outside the walls. Alvarez felt a cold sensation in his chest. Explain that. Salazar stepped closer to the door. Detective, Bryce wasn't helping us escape. Alvarez frowned. Then what was he doing? Salazar answered calmly. He was warning you. Alvarez blinked. Warning us about what? Salazar leaned closer. The people waiting outside. Before Alvarez could respond, alarms suddenly erupted through the prison. Red lights flashed across the corridor. Guards rushed past, shouting into radios. Alvarez grabbed one officer. What happened? The officer looked pale. Security breach in the north wing. Alvarez's pulse spiked. Escape attempt. The officer shook his head. Worse. Worse how? The officer hesitated. Then he spoke the words that made Alvarez's stomach drop. One of the inmates is gone. Alvarez felt the world narrow. Who? The officer swallowed hard. Marcus Tate. Alvarez rushed toward the security control room. Guards were shouting, monitors flashing with camera feeds. Warden Hammond stood at the center of the chaos. What happened? Alvarez demanded. A technician pointed at the screen. The footage showed Tate's cell. The door was still locked. The camera never stopped recording, but inside the cell, Marcus Tate was gone. No escape, no damage, no explanation, just an empty cell. And carved into the steel bed frame. 3 chilling words, Phase 1 complete.
Whispering secrets only the nigger. Center. Every flickering ladder tells a story of a journey lost, intimate, in the silence, a single moment changes everything. Some stories never end, they simply linger in the mist.